Cool, and we are recording. Welcome to this week's Substrate Sync. We have not a super full agenda, but not unfull agenda. But yeah, right off the bat, I think we talked a little bit last time about like having a deprecation policy, or maybe not a formal deprecation policy, but I think we're starting to remove stuff, which I think is good. Especially, I think Nails, you've won a number of PRs for removing stuff that's been up about like over a year, which I think makes sense. And I think from our perspective, we're just double checking that anything that we remove is supported in the libraries, or is a workaround for it in the libraries already. And I think that might be I don't know if we need like a formal policy, but it might be like, let's check that Substrate RS, Substrate Python, Substrate Java, and Substrate Go can handle the new constructs. And then if that's the case, then I think we should be good to remove it. That's kind of like the only thing I was going to say about that. Really, was like the policy is like, well, it's like someone like the policy could be like it's been deprecated for X amount of time, and also all the libraries have supported it for at least one release of the library. And then once that's in place, we should be good to remove it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, just as you know, Victor, for us internally, also just making sure Data Fusion appropriately supports the new thing is important, because Substrate RS isn't really doing any migration things. So yeah, just that's it. Just got to make sure for that one too.
Yeah, I think I might say like within the ecosystem, I might say, within our ecosystem, the Substrate one, it's like, hey, let's make sure the library support it, and then we might ask like, hey, give us a week to add it to Data Fusion or patch it.
Can we actually document this thing and then update it in the Substrate?
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of writing it down.
And also, yeah, which part of the libraries that we are actually taking care of to make sure this version is upgraded. I think explicitly listing those libraries in the website is also important.
Yeah, I think I had an action item for last time, but I only did the AI policy, not the
yeah, policy.
But no, I think this also gives you more motivation. Just what's supported, but also what's supported and what are we deprecating. Ben, you have your hand up.
Do we want to have a position in general on the frequently occurring case where you have like an old representation and a new representation, and there's this question for the implementers if they should be omitting the old fields or the new fields or both? Maybe that was a convoluted way to ask the question. When you have a library, do we have a policy where there's some time where we have to omit the old field and the new field for some time, or can we just switch to the new field? Or do we not want to have a policy on that and do it on a case-by-case basis?
We have a version field for a reason. So the consumer has to be able to handle that version. If it can't handle that version, it should say, sorry, I can't handle that version.
Yeah, but I don't know if any of the libraries do anything with that version field yet.
There's also a weird thing where you can get into like dependency cycles where if we're depending on like free of the library. So if we start emitting one too early in one of them and it's not supporting the other consumer, like it's tricky. I would generally advocate for populating both as like when possible do so, just to make the migration easier, because then you don't have to synchronize releases, or you don't have to like order your releases. You can say, hey, this now emits both. Update your thing to support the new one, and then once that's set up, that's what we did for URI and URI stuff. Is we did both, and that made that migration a lot. It was harder to write and implement, but it was easier to actually do the migration in like a live system.
I agree, and to be clear, I'm not saying this subliminally to talk about the aggregate one that Niels proposed. I think that one is probably fine to just switch to the new one, but I just mean in general going forward, because I'm sure we will have more that we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's
actually. Go ahead.
That is also a bit my feeling. Depends a bit on whether we're talking about new deprecations as we go forward, or things that have been deprecated for a very long time already in our specification. We're just catching up. There might be a difference in how we handle these cases. And there might also be a difference on how we handle deprecations once we have a 1.0 release, and before we have a 1.0 release, I could imagine.
I want to probe something there for a second. The comments that I just heard Ben and Victor make, and with David's comment, I feel like there's actually something that's not formalized there. If a tool outputs data that can be consumed by a, say, V50 client and a V51 client, right? Like in the example where like we've introduced the new fields, but the producer is producing the old fields and the new fields. Okay. In that situation, what is our expectation of the version that should be emitted from the producer?
The version the producer should emit?
Because if it's the higher number, which you kind of think it would be because it has the new fields, then a consumer that is strict would be like, I don't know how to consume this. Right? But you're talking about a situation where you have an older consumer who's consuming this newer plan. And so my assumption there is that you're not actually looking at the version field, but rather organizationally, you're managing this compatibility. And so the question that kind of popped into my head, and this is a solution, a possible solution for it, it feels really weird, but is it that the version field for plan should be a range?
I mean, we do have the situation with precision time, for example. We still have the old types time, and we have precision time in the same release of the specification. And before that we had a release that only had time, or multiple releases. And then once we remove the time type, then we have a release that only has a precision type, the precision type. So in a way, it would still make sense if you have any of the versions in between, which have both the deprecated type still present and the new type, then you could argue that the libraries should emit both, because the specifications still have both. Right?
I also don't think we can rely on version for compatibility checks in the libraries anyways at this point in time. Is the other thing where we could say that, oh, this library supports this range, but in practice there are constructs in that range the library won't read because none of the libraries support all the feature sets.
I'm suggesting the opposite. I'm suggesting that the plan is the thing that's versioned, right? Like
But the plan includes a Substrate version in it?
A range of Substrate versions.
But even if it did, none of the libraries know how to check that. I guess this is the point where the way that we figure out,
do you think it should be?
compatibility.
Let me clarify.
Go ahead.
Do you think that it should be like that, or are you just saying that it is like that?
I don't think it should be like that. I think it is like that. And as much as I would like to solve for the problem of it should be like that, I think step 0 is getting rid of as much old stuff as possible and having the discussion from a place where, I guess it's the world I would like to get to, but I'm more interested in how we get to that world than the world itself.
Well, but it directly connects to Ben's comment about what is our policy in libraries when there's just two ways to represent something. Should the library output both? Like, there's two different things, right? Like, a producer has to say, I have these versions are compatible with what I'm producing, right? And then the second point is consumers then have to pay attention to that. It doesn't mean we couldn't start doing the first part, even if the second part is years from now. Right. Yeah. And so anyway, so like to me, like formalizing the concept of like, what is this library doing? When we introduce a new feature, right? We introduce a new kind of grouping sets. What do we want this library to do? Do we want it to only produce the new thing, which is the simpler thing to do, right? Or do we want it to produce the old thing and the new thing? And so I don't even have a strong opinion about what libraries should do. But it kind of seems useful for libraries to say that to have a principle.
Mm-hmm.
Each library. I don't even say that all the libraries should be the same. I'm saying like a particular library that people are depending on should probably have a principle, so that when new developers come in and do something, that they know that they should, if they introduce an alternative representation of something, they should produce the new and the old, or not.
I mean, there's also not the only way to do it. You could also you update the consumers first to handle the new thing, and then you can update the producers whenever you want. Like there's multiple strategies for it. But also, Ben, you had your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's even worth saying because I don't want this to take up too much time in the conversation as a whole. But one crude way to handle this too is just when you introduce a new field that technically isn't a breaking change. So you just use semantic versioning in some loose way to say, I'm sending version 0.72.3, but the consumer is 0.72.2. So it should be able to handle it, but it just wouldn't account for the cases where a breaking change is introduced, but the plan doesn't actually contain anything using that breaking change.
That only works if we guarantee that the producers produce both the old and the new, right? Like,
yes, I agree.
Field, a new representation of grouping, for example, is not a breaking change as long as the producers produce the old version as well.
Exactly, which I think is a good idea.
Yankel?
So, I mean, we've been actually going through this like internally, but it's really when you just roll out something new and trying to like deprecate things, you have to always prepare the consumer first. The consumer should be able to handle both old and new for a while, and then once all the consumer is capable of doing that, then we can start to make a change on the producer to basically not to start to emitting like old one. And then once and that point, like we can actually safely deprecate all the producer. The consumer is ready to handle both of them. Producer is starting to actually deprecate, so that there is no basically no new usage of the old field. Then we can like deprecate. So as a product or service or system, this is very clear. I mean, I know exactly like which one talks to which one. But in this like library, I don't know like what is the actual scenario that these libraries are talking to. Are they really talking to each other, or is it really isolated in the systems that people are using to develop Substrate?
We're using 3 of them, and we send plans back and forth across 3 languages, which is why we care about this. But what I will say, I think from the conversation, I feel like everyone's roughly on board with the like deprecations are migrations, treat them as such. Don't couple your consumers or your libraries or your systems to require like synchronous things.
Yeah.
I could write something to that effect.
So
and then
I think like the grouping expression change. This is actually the car side is able to handle both cases, right?
Calcite?
Yeah, I think a car side.
Hopefully Java can consume both.
Java, yeah.
I think most things can consume it now. Like if everything can consume it, we're safe to switch. The only thing we'll have to check is data fusion because it's the engine we care about. But
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So for Substrate Java, the implementation currently consumes both, but it only produces the old output, and I have a PR open to produce the new output only.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's where
So I think that's actually a really great example for this like deprecation path. So the library should be able to handle old and new. And then the producer side is still producing the old. And once you have that state, and then you can breaking change. The producer is actually producing new, and then then we can deprecate the old one. So I think that's a great example for the migration paths for the library.
I'll capture this in a doc somewhere for in the thing about generally like how to do stuff. There are multiple strategies, but
right. So then we can basically stretch these things to cross library boundary. So all the library should be able to deserialize or handle like old and new, so we just stretch this boundary across the library. Then we can actually move.
And this goes back to your original point about which libraries are we claiming that we will deprecate and migrate things for.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I can handle that. So I'm sure there's like we could probably talk about deprecation policies for like hours. I'm pretty sure because people software. I don't think we need to. I think we're broadly in agreement. And then to Jack's point, how do we get to a world where we can rely on versions is an interesting question to ask. But maybe at the end if we have time after everything. I was going to say I'm going to call for committers and PMCs. I'm going to send something to the email list for requesting to see if people have any ideas for new committers and PMCs. I feel like it's been 2 months since the last one, so this is just me saying I'm going to do that. Cool.
I would just mention that if anybody sees any good opportunities to talk about Substrate, they should take advantage of them. Because I think that we don't have a lot of new incoming activity. Like fresh faces. And so speaking about things at places, if you have an opportunity to do so, is probably one of the best ways to have fresh faces. Because when Victor's like, hey, let's call for people, I'm like, have a lot of people showed up? Like we need fresh blood all the time.
Next one's sort of an operational thing. Crate's IO access. We had to yank a crate because we accidentally released a Substrate crate because it was breaking data fusion. Andy Grove ended up giving me access to the Substrate crate. I'll add the other PMCs as well. I don't know if you saw, Jack, but we broke the Substrate RS sandbar last week, and we realized that only you and Andy Grove had credentials to the crate.
Yeah, he got to it first. I was actually on the thread, and I was just about to respond, and he got to it first. So I was like, okay.
Yeah, not your bad, Ben. Because actually, so crates.io, we have access now. We have access now.
Random question. Is there sufficient access on all of the other registries?
That was going to be the follow-up that Ben was also asking about.
Like the Java one, I don't even remember what
Java's the one I don't know about. So I guess
and then there's Node. Is there a Node one? Maybe there's not a Node one.
We're
a PyPy or whatever.
PyPy, we have an organization now. So PyPy, we have an organization. Wes and I are in it.
Yeah, the Go one doesn't matter.
The Go is fake. They don't have a package manager.
Yeah.
I'll invite the
Node
other
one
PMCs to the Rust crate, and then also the PyPy organization. But that leaves Java. I don't know. I actually don't know how to get credits for that. It's like, is it in Sonatype?
It moved. I remember someone worked on it moving. Like, Niels, was that you? Someone was working on it moving like a couple years ago.
Yeah, one of my team members did. Yeah.
Did anybody remember what it was? Because I remember someone was pinging me, and I was helping someone with something at some point on that.
Yeah, so this is managed by Sonatype, and they manage.
It's still Sonatype?
Yeah,
then I might have it.
They just changed the system from an entity, a whole authentication and so on around how you publish things.
Like, I'm pretty sure you had the Maven Central key or the Sonatype password. That was, we added a Maven Central key like 4 years ago, or 9 months ago, sorry. So I think that was you, Jocks, but I don't know if Maven or Sonatype has a concept of an organization or something that we could add other people to.
I need to check how the new system works. The old system, there was a way to register multiple users. I need to check.
Yeah, I feel like the old system was you open a Jira ticket someplace.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So I think that's how it works. Is I think we have to open it. Well, I don't know if it's a new thing. So if someone could look that up, I don't even know. I mean, it looks like I have a login to Substrate to Maven Central. I don't know if I'm the one that's. Yeah, I don't. Oh, I have user tokens.
You're able to create tokens, which means you're an admin somewhere.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's see if I can figure that out.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't? Yeah, we can do this offline. I'll add the other people to PyPy, and then we can. If you figure out who owns the Java stuff, we can make an org or whatever the thing is to just add me and Weston and Youngshul to it. I guess also David. Cool. Well, that was kind of a fun thing, which kind of brings me to my next thing, which is a weird one, especially in the context of the breaking change. Where with the way that we're planning on doing packaging, where the generated code version is tied to the spec version, we do end up in a weird place where there are protobufs that like semantic or protobuf non-breaking changes that result in breaking library changes. Like in the case of the Rust one, it's the generated code atom and enum variant, and they were using it not exhaustively in data fusion, so it failed. And like I don't know if it's actually a good strategy to do that, unless we decide to switch the protobufs from being pure protobuf semvar to being protobuf semvar plus if we break any of the generated code libraries, that's also breaking. It gets weird. That you know what, you can depend on the libraries. The libraries will provide you with. We provide like semvar guarantees for the libraries, but we say that the generated artifacts are tied to the spec. This also
The
comes
idea
up
that a language thinks that adding a new enum is a breaking change, to me feels like the broken part. Like I mean, I'm sure that there are other examples, but that particular example, I'm like, yeah, Rust, come on, just get with the times here. Like that shouldn't be a breaking change.
I mean,
like,
on the other hand, it's nice because what they're actually doing, they're saying, no, you have an enum, it's exhaustive, so make sure you have a.
yeah, I get it. I get it. I'm just saying, like, it just makes it very, very hard to not do breaking changes.
Yeah, unless we make everyone always put a bang pattern on all match statements. Or not bang and underscore, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be my argument for our libraries for sure, is there should be a catch-all that's an exception.
I mean, the thing I'll say about our libraries is in the library we'd say, oh, we're trying to bump to the latest version. That breaks because the protobuf breaks. Let's modify the library to handle the update, and then the library retains semvar. Like to the point about like should the generated code artifacts follow semvar per language semantics or just stick to the spec? I think is maybe a trickier question, but I think we're generally in agreement that the library.
I feel like they're just two different things. Like the spec has a semantic version, and the library has a semantic version, and it's possible that the spec change, which is not a semantic version change, has a corresponding library change, which is a semantic versioning change. They're just two different artifacts that have different versioning strategies. Same rules, but like they're not necessarily coupled.
Yeah, I think protobuf is pretty clear about what's a breaking change and what's not. And that's different than what the Rust library. So like adding a new item to an enum is not going to be a protobuf breaking change, but it will be a Rust breaking change.
Yeah. But I think the question is not about the meaning of breaking changes across these different libraries, but rather about the specific case of the Substrate packaging project Victor has been working on, in which there is a desire to have a one-to-one correspondence between Substrate versions and the artifacts of generated code for that particular version. But the point is that one-to-one correspondence kind of breaks because we can't consider the generated Rust code, which is merely just a wrapper of the protobuf generated code for Rust, as the same version, because that might have a breaking change in it, even though the protobuf version did not.
And I'm actually okay with that. I'm actually okay with having the generated code be breaking and saying that the library is where we guarantee semvar. The generated artifact is generated. If you want semvar guarantees, pull the library in, don't pull in the protobufs themselves.
Just to address the comment that Weston just said, I think that this is actually a case for not pulling the Rust generated code into Substrate packaging, but leaving it in Substrate RS, because it gives us the opportunity to then just say the version of the package might need to be bumped if the API changes. And I realized that didn't happen with this broken release, but that was for an unrelated bug, which had to do with the check semvar tool incorrectly giving a thumbs up when it should have said there was a breaking change. But that doesn't solve the problem in general, just for the Rust case. And it adds
if you wanted to be pure, I don't have a strong opinion about this, but if you wanted to be pure, you should prefix the versions of the generated code with something that is like that makes it clear that this is not semantic versioned. right? Like if it was hashed, if the version number is hash.1.2.3 or whatever, where .1.2.3 is the actual semantic code version, then it's very clear that that the actual package is not semantically versioned or something like that. I don't know. I don't know all the rules for all different package managers, but it's like you basically need to do something. Like the other option would be is that like you simply have an initial number which is just iterating upwards, right? So the minor version, the major version is just the next time we release a protobuf package, and the minor version is the actual substrate release or something like that. Right. So the first version is 1.61, and the second version is 2.62, and the third version is 3.63.
Oh, it's the protobuf model of what they're I can think
Anyway,
about
I don't, as I said, I don't have a strong opinion about it. I feel like it is a little bit weird to do semantic versioning on a bunch of stuff and then have some stuff that isn't. But
Yeah.
I don't care.
I mean, the flip side of it was the reason we wanted to pin the artifact versions to the spec, because we run into issues where we have library version, 0.72, which supports which has protobufs from 0.48 in it, where like trying to figure out what the library actually had, and it was weird. And the assumption was like, we can pin this one-to-one, the protobuf, generate the protobuf one-to-one. So well, version 40 of the protobufs is version 40 to the spec. Version 72 of the protobufs is version 72 to the spec, along with like all of the extension files and stuff like that. And then the trick is, to your point, can we make it clear it's not necessarily following semantic versioning per Rust rules versus like protobuf rules?
Or or like major change. I mean, so basically, if the package, the major versions tracks all the breaking changes, and then the minor version accounts for basically the protobuf update. Is that model? I mean, is it like, Jack, what you described, like the prefixing the package version with something?
Oh, well, I'm suggesting that if you want to be correct with semantic versioning, the simplest way to do it is, as Weston kind of mentioned, is basically treat all of the protobuf versions as breaking. And then just monotonically increase the number every time. Every time we release a protobuf for whatever, we monotonically increase it. And the major version is that monotonic number. It has no meaning in the rest of our versioning system. It is just to make it sure that it's clear that this is a new version of the protobuf, and we don't know what, we just assume it's breaking changes because it could be, right? Because in the case of the Rust, it might be, right?
Right.
And then the second number is the substrate version. So if substrate is at version 138, then it's the monotonic value dot 138.
I see. So it will. I think that makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and if you wanted to make it smarter, you could actually not bump the major version of the package unless the tool for that language decides that it needs to be bumped. Right? If there's tools for most languages to determine whether or not the API changes are backwards compatible, and so you could use that. I don't know. Anyway, so it's just like this thing where it's like, meh.
Right. If the package is just a shim that just parsing the proto message, then I think it just makes sense to every proto change actually is a breaking change, is making sense. If you are actually doing more than that, then I think it's a tougher.
Higher level libraries don't have to, just because a lower level library has a breaking change doesn't mean a higher level library has a breaking change, right?
Right.
Totally
Yeah.
Cool. This is a lot of food for thought for me as I think about packaging. Actually, Rust is my next target, and I'm trying to figure out how to think about that. So I'm also pretty sure this technically also applies to the Python stuff we've already done, theoretically, but.
Well,
actually,
I guess.
Go ahead.
I'm a huge fan of like exhaustive enumeration of enum, and I'm glad that Rust is doing that, but it can be a pain in the ass.
And at least the Rust one files have a nice error message. Some of the Go ones are even more obscure, like or backwards compatible. I think turning a one-off into a turning a field into a one-off is not backwards compatible for like Go for reasons. To the point, actually, I don't think the thing I suggested earlier, which is like, oh, we should just think about the generated code artifacts for every language we care about and check for breaking changes there, because it just gets really messy to begin. Like trying to predict breaking changes like that is hard across really more than one language.
All I wanted to say was just we can have this discussion offline, but I just want it to be an allowed possibility that a solution for the Substrate RS one is to just not put it in Substrate protobuf, or sorry, to put it in Substrate packaging, because the problem that Substrate packaging was partially solving, which had to do with like these Go and Python issues where you were registering protobuf handlers and there was collisions, which were things we were dealing with internally, we haven't encountered with Rust. So if we do move it, maybe that's the right decision, but it just means we have to deal with the consequences of this conversation there. So
it's also interesting to think about, because the actual reason to do it for us is also to check in the generated code so that the downstreams don't have to pull in prost and prost build.
that's a good point.
All of the builds have to pull in the proto-C dependency to compile the Rust bindings, which is a pain in the ass.
That's a very good point. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe we'll do that, Jax, after. Okay. I guess the thing I was hoping for was someone would have a really easy solution to the problem of protobuf semvar, but the answer is no. It's versioning and whatever. Yeah, I guess the next item is actually technically yours, Ben, where there's both options and enums as a way to specify stuff in. How put this? There's no clear guidance about when to use an option versus when to use an enum for certain things. I think this came up, Ben, because you added. I
added a couple functions.
Yeah.
And I think they all used options. And I didn't even really know about using enums. And then someone, maybe it was Victor, asked, "Have you considered using enums?" And then I thought, what are enums? And then I tried to look through the documentation. It wasn't entirely clear to me when one should be preferred versus the other.
Yeah, the example this came up with was like sort, where we're passing in the sort direction as an option in the context of sorting arrays with Lambda functions.
Yeah, so the intention was user input values are enums, system managed values are options. Generally speaking, the thinking is that options are largely something that is not variable in a system, right? And so they were used for things like, hey, how does tie behavior work, or like sort of edge case stuff, where like systems that throw errors when you have an overflow versus not, right? Most systems, most databases do support a flag, which you can turn that on or off, and it's slower if you turn it on, right? But it's a global system property. It's not a per function property in execution. So options were really limited to those kinds of things, something that the user is largely not going to be aware of or be managing at a per function invocation level. Whereas the enums were things that a user would input, like, hey, I want to extract this part of the date, right? Like things that are basically a constrained set of choices for a function that a user would be inputting, and could potentially be inputting at different levels at different spots in the same query.
That makes a lot of sense to me. What about in the case of sort, let's say, for example, or just any function where there's just a couple sensible defaults, like do we put nulls first or do we put nulls last? It's not merely edge case handling, right? Like it actually affects the semantics, but also from a SQL perspective, a user doesn't care about it because whatever engine they're using, they're expecting the semantics of that particular engine. Are you imagining those cases then as options or enums?
Well, I think it's hard to answer that as a general question. Your concrete example to me is an enum. right? And in fact, that's
Okay.
how we handle it for, like, systems, for example, have different default behaviors for sort, right?
Sure.
Or different default behaviors for collate or whatever. But users can manipulate them and regularly do in the query, and may do it multiple times in a single query. And so that to me is like, okay, definitely enum. Options, like there's a reasonable argument that options are really global things. They're not in the way that they're imposed in the functions. But I think that if you looked at most systems, they would probably expect to treat the options the same for all function invocations in a plan. Like if the same function shows up multiple times, there's kind of a general expectation that the option will be the same in every case. So if a user is going to want to manipulate it at a per function level, it is probably not an option. That's kind of how I think about it.
And weirdly enough, it actually might be both. Right? If you have like a sorting, like I have an input list sorting, like sort this list with no arguments, other arguments attached to it. It's like that defaults to the system default sorting option for that behavior. But if you're passing in an actual like, oh, I want to sort by some sort comparator, like by some ascending nulls or nulls last, that's an enum. So like, weirdly enough, sort might be both, I guess.
Wait, what was the first one? Sorry, I thought you were talking about the second one at the first one. But what was the first?
I guess if I call sort on an array with like, I just say, just sort this array. At that point, that's not really an enum. That's like, okay, pick whatever the system default sort is for that, and that's an option.
Wait, when you say pick whatever the default,
wait, I don't know what the options would be there. What are the choices?
Nulls first, nulls last, descending.
No, that. Well, so remember that we don't have to do one-to-one mapping. If a system has a set of defaults, right? Like every system has, like, ignore array sort, just look at normal order, sort by, order by, whatever it's called in SQL, right? Systems have default values, right? And Substrate doesn't even worry about the default values. It just says it's explicit in the plan, right? So I would say I would be the same way here, which is that I would make it an explicit enum, which is what is the sort order you want to use, and the engine would populate it if the user doesn't give it.
That's right. You wouldn't even give sort with no enum option, so you have to pick a sort, and the engine can provide it when it calls it.
Yeah, because remember, like the user's not typing into Substrate, right? They're typing into the higher level language that's then getting converted to the plan. So in that kind of example, I would just say like, okay, if the system has a default, but the user can easily manipulate it, it's an enum, and the translation layer from the system to the producer should just pick the one that's the default if the user hasn't expressed it.
Wait, so
I would never give the anything goes on. To your point, actually, the anything goes to be if you call sort with nothing on it, you say, hey, we're defaulting to Substrate defaults to this. You have to do this. If not, you have to override it using the other function call type.
So we allow people to not pass in anything for option. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But enum, you must provide
set or know how to consume options. If I'm being real.
Yeah. So yeah, the special case of options is that if you pass in, I can't remember what the exact rules are, but if you don't pass anything in, that means the consumer can pick amongst whatever is possible, and will pick the top thing in the list by priority. And if you pass things in, multiple things in, I think the consumer is able to pick any of them in the order that they are available, or something like that. Like there's basically precedent rules around options that don't make sense for semantic. Generally speaking, there aren't a lot of good uses for options. Like the overflow handling, like the tie handling for numbers, for like floating point numbers or whatever it is. Like there's just a few of them that we see show up over and over again. Odds are we should never use them unless everybody comes together and says, yeah, this is another good use of them. In fact, we should probably have a doc that says that these are the only valid uses of options right now. And if you think you should use options, talk with everybody on a call before you do. Because it's a very nuanced, like, shouldn't be used regularly kind of thing.
Do you want to write that, Jax?
No.
I can do it. I do think I have contributed some functions then which have used options, which probably would be more appropriately enums then.
Yeah, the thing to remember, right, is that the consumer has choices when there are options.
Yeah.
And if that's not what you want, you shouldn't be using options.
Yeah, I understand. That makes a lot of sense. The only thing I'm thinking about is just now if I change these function definitions, even though it was just in basically the last release now, it could technically be a breaking change, which is just
Only a little bit, because when you add the enums are also arguments, so they have different signatures. So if you add a sort with an array, like the enum and the array, it's a different signature, so we can migrate to it, and then yeah, we can remove the old ones. But
that's true. But if we do a migration for one of these functions,
The,
which I
the
don't think anyone's
removal, the
using,
removal is breaking. Yeah.
Did anyone pick up?
Yeah. I at the same time, I'm like if you mark it as like don't use this and then delete it in a month, I think you're probably fine.
also,
that's-
given that we're the ones who added it and we're the ones who are going to have support for it in the ecosystem, because we're the ones who care about it, we can manage it.
yeah, we will manage it. It's more like selfishly, I have people who specifically want to use these functions, and I was like, I'm going to take care of this today. But now it's like, okay, I will take care of it when it happens.
Yeah, but they can use that for now, and we can always migrate them. Honestly, the
But then
biggest thing
that's
for me
two
is
migrations to
if we're going to
manage.
rely more on enums, we need to support enums better in the libraries, because right now that support is. I know the isthmus mappings were really weird with them because they don't. Yeah, the mappings are get wonky. Okay, cool. That's good to know. So yeah, the general guidance that we can write up is that if you think you need an option, think more and then ask us, because you probably can use an enum.
Mhm.
Okay, and then last but not least, I'm sure an easy question by Yongshul. How to reference by anchor. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. So, yeah, I have been pounding on the auto representations because we are in the middle of translating all the complex SQL queries, and the SQL Server and derivative, they support the auto references fairly natively because of its transaction processing code path with the index things. It can represent the correlated subqueries and so on. So we need auto reference as a, say, first class citizen. So what I tried, so the first thing was the lateral join that I introduced. So basically by giving some like new auto reference scope. But then there are other case, which is, I mean, it's a really mind-boggling case, which is we do share expressions. And so, I mean, relational expression. So relational expression can appear have multiple consumers. But this shared expression also has an auto reference. So it is a very funky shape. It is rare. It is not like it's happening daily, but it does occur in production. So you have a shared expressions that has an auto reference. And then this thing is basically these auto references is found by somewhere high up in the tree. Now, if we are stay in our say offset-based model, like tracking depths, auto reference must specify the depths and so on, which makes sense. I mean, it's okay to if you don't assume this multiple consumer, but it quickly becomes a nightmare when there are multiple consumers who can actually bind in the same place. So yeah, so I try to in one of the PR that I actually put it's out there, is actually trying to kind of try to stay within the boundary. I mean, stay within the current substrate scheme. So basically, we need to handle this potential different depths Depending on the consumer, you may reach through like different paths. So the depth has changed, and so somehow you need to make a hole in the shared expression with the outer reference, and then trying to fill in the hole with the correct depths depending on where you're coming from. So, and it becomes like really hairy. So instead, I'm trying to see the temperature, test the temperature, whether are we okay to change the outer reference by anchor model, like the functions and methods and so on. So basically outer reference, each concrete outer reference will bear with the anchor. And then whenever this like binding happens, we will introduce that anchor there. So there's a mapping in the tree that the outer reference has, okay, reference this anchor. And then there's a, in hopefully like one place that define that anchor, hey, this is the anchor value. Then, so what do you think? I mean, this is kind of like departure in our core field reference model, which used to be all offset based and relative things. Now it's basically global, something effectively global.
And to summarize it, the issue is when you capture outer references in like subtrees or other subrelations, and then you can inline them potentially in multiple places, or they might get referenced in multiple places where the depth is different, or like the outer reference going back up in a single tree is pretty trivial. But if you're inlining, you think, oh, in this subtree it's only one out, but in this subtree it's two out.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, you can make the case that you shouldn't construct.
Also,
go ahead.
So the depth is one problem, and then but also the field is also a problem, because you're outputting effectively the same column, but I mean, because we are using offset, well, this column is on the second field, the other one is like third field. Then, okay, like which one should I use?
Yeah, like I guess strictly speaking, those subtrees aren't substitutable in the same way. Like you could argue that you shouldn't construct them that way. But then the other side is like, it is the offset-based model is very tricky to work with. And I guess what you're saying is that you would be able to tag every node with like an anchor effectively and say, actually, this reference is to this node specifically somewhere in the tree. So instead of like go up two subquery boundaries and stop here, you say, go find the node tagged foo, and that's where you get the data for this.
Right, yeah.
Do we, my lack of spending time in Substrate recently is going to show here. I feel like is there another version of this, which is that you can't have an outer reference in certain contexts, and that we need another type of thing. Like we need like basically, because let's say that you've got this shared subtree, right? In the shared subtree, you want it to, there's this spot, this variable spot, right? The spot where there's a variable, and sometimes I want to replace the variable by foo, and sometimes I want to replace it by bar, right? Where foo and bar are two distinct outer references. Does that pattern work instead? To basically say like, hey, if you want to share a subtree, if you want to have a variable outer reference, basically, it means you need to put a variable there, not an outer reference. And then there's a way to say that we have this subtree, but with this variable resolution.
That is, I think that is basically the anchor-based proposal, essentially, because
but the anchor-based,
because
at least the way that I am understanding the anchor-based proposal is it is specific. I'm saying that like we have a pattern where you can take a tree and say that there's an expression in this tree, and it's basically like a macro or something where there's an expression in this tree, and it's unresolved.
Mhm.
And I can take that tree and I can wrap it with a resolver, if you will,
Yeah.
and say, when you see this expression type, it's this resolution. Which, yes, it is the anchor model, but it's not limiting it to specifically outer references. It's not outer reference related at all, right? It's simply saying that, like, hey, if you want to have a variable in a tree, you can have a variable in a tree, and you can resolve it later.
That's somewhere, I mean, to be fair, like somewhere you need to express like where I mean you need to specify like how this thing is resolved in the plan, right?
Yeah, but
Otherwise,
I'm
like,
saying, but I'm saying that it would be a it's a wrapping relation, and you can use a wrapping relation or a wrapping expression, which basically is cascade resolution for that variable name anywhere in that subtree.
This feels like the closest analogy I have, Fred, is like lambda references for subtrees instead of expressions.
Yeah.
Where you're deferring, you're saying like, hey, I have a subtree that needs to be bound to something. When you want to inject it into the tree, you have to give me the binding. Which actually does have an application that we've also talked about for something else, Youngsho, which is like lateral joins, where you would invoke that with like the left-hand side table. But then I'm not sure how that looks like for outer references.
it was that lateral join current proposal is actually using outer reference, like a substrate built-in outer reference scheme. But if you, yeah, so we could make it as a, I mean, so to be fair, like a Lambda case, Lambda clearly separates the Lambda parameter, say, placeholder. So Lambda definition has there's a Lambda parameter reference, and then there's a parameter declaration. So there's a contract between the bindings and so on. So in here, so basically, if we for in our scenario, it is really yeah, when that happens, the field reference happens, it has to declare. Perhaps, yeah, it could be, I don't know, like some form of that, hey, marking that, hey, this is something special. And then
Yeah, but I think that calling it like relational lambda is probably a good conceptualization. Like, I'm attracted to that after Victor said it. Like, I don't know if he said exactly that, but something like that. Because conceptually speaking, that's like the whole subtree. The thing that is like, yeah, to me, the whole subtree is not resolved until you can map in this external value, right? Just like a lambda, like you can't use the lambda until you pass in the arg, like the binding branch, what it's called.
yeah,
and it's the same here, right? Which is like until you pass in the outer reference you want to use, yeah, it is a little weird though because of the distance thing. I don't know.
I guess actually the thing I might say for actually Ben, you want to, if you have a comment real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that this could be an interesting idea, this lambda relation thing. And just one thing I wanted to point about the initial approach Young-Chul suggested of just having references and anchors is that this does feel to me a bit strange if you do just references and anchors, because as I understand it right now, we only use references and anchors today for sort of global properties of plans, right?
Yeah.
Like the list of URNs, the list of types, et cetera, these kinds of things. Whereas
Yeah.
this is a very local feeling, so it becomes the job of consumers to maintain kind of a map of all of these indices anywhere throughout the plan that
Yeah.
could potentially be referenced, which just,
So-
I don't know, gives me a
Yeah, so
Your feeling.
technically, there are like a few places that we can introduce the correlation. So the lateral join is one place, and then the scalar subquery is another context where we can introduce this binding. So I think technically all I need is I want that specific places. Can we refer this by a name? Let's say name or ID rather than a depth, depth or field.
We already time, so I do want to be conscious for that. I think to continue this, actually, I think it might be good to go on Slack and actually have like, I think we should think about concrete examples. Like if you can show us an example of one of those like out of reference trees where you have the relations where they don't line up, that would be useful to kind of go from there. I think it's really easy to talk about stuff in the abstract, and like most things SQL related. When you start going from trees to like ASIC, like DAGs, is where it gets really weird, and that's kind of what we're trying to think about. We do have some PR requests. I want to go through real quick. Some deprecation stuff. I think Ben, you're looking at it to make sure the libraries support it. Nils, your current function handling, I think you're going to update it based on to have the row stuff and the once per plan model. Caden's got a PR out for unsigned integer extensions, so we're adding support for that. I think that's ready for review by PMC. And then, I didn't even get to Ben's PR on the nullability handling. I was reading it this morning, but cool. But yeah, just like review requests if you'll have time or have capacity. And then, yeah, you were saying something, sorry.
No.
I was gonna say something about, so Young-Chul, on the one hand, like I do have this question of like, can it be more generalized? On the other side, I would say it is a place where I've never felt great about the model, the outer reference model that exists today.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is kind of I feel like it's a gnarly problem, if you will. And so we were trying to figure out what is the quintessential nature of it. And so, yeah, if we can come up with a better model, I'm all for it. I think that I would say that generally speaking, the anchors to me were about, and maybe there's places where this is not true, but really we're about compactness of plan, not logical distinction, if you will.
Okay.
So I struggle with I struggle with this particular use of it, because it feels like it's somehow fundamentally different. That may not be true anymore. There must be maybe enough places where we use anchors in other ways that I'm wrong. But yeah, so anyway, I'm not at all specifically. I think I was the one that created the original outer reference stuff. It's not sacred at all, but it is trying to think about what is because when we started, like everybody has a completely different way to represent this, and it's all like object based, internal to like their optimizers, and you're just like, well, none of this can be expressed in a serialized way. So so it took a while to get there. And I've never been a big fan of it. So if you can figure something else out that's better, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's continue the discussion offline, and sounds good.
Yeah, I think examples would help. With like, this stuff is easy to, I say easy to talk about in the abstract, hard to talk about in the abstract, hard to talk about in the real. But thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Oh, I should end the transcript.